Hello, we're Steve and Elizabeth Williams. We've been coming to Plymouth Alliance for about a year and a half, and we wanted to talk to you about our story with foster care.
So several years ago, Steve and I were attending a church in central Wisconsin, and we were challenged with thinking about a 5-year or a 10-year plan. And this wasn't a financial plan or like a life plan, I guess. It was more of a spiritual growth plan. And as I was thinking about it and putting together some things for a small group we were working with, I really got to thinking that everything we're doing right now is what we would be doing in 5 or 10 years. And I kind of came to call it just kind of the Christian status quo. And it bothered me because we were really involved. We worked in the nursery. We were Awana directors. I actually worked at 2 churches over the years, but I felt like in 10 years we were going to be doing the exact same thing. And I didn't feel like the influence that we were having was enough, I guess. It was just status quo. It was what was expected from the Christian community, but it wasn't really life-changing, at least not for me. And I felt like I was meant to do something different or bigger, and that would have a more direct influence. It wouldn't be Sunday and Wednesday only. It would be like our whole life, and it would affect our whole family, and it would be something that we would really just embrace kind of wholeheartedly. So after we moved 4 times in 2 years, we were finally settled again, and we were living in Fond du Lac, and I felt like I had all kinds of time. I homeschool our 2 biological children, but even with that, I felt like we have time and we have space, and we need to be doing something. And for whatever reason, the idea of foster care just kept coming to my mind. And it's not even that I'm a kid person. I never babysat. I never wanted a whole slew of kids. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to get married. But a lot changed, and I felt like, we've got time. I'm home with my kids anyway. What's the difference if we add another kid or 2 into the mix? And so that's what we started to pursue. And it was something that I think was kind of difficult for Steve to embrace at first. He was really like, we're happy. Why do we want to break up, the time that we have and just the freedom that we have? And I just kept thinking we just need to do something more.
So Elizabeth was started to work on me about this. Like she said, I wasn't terribly thrilled with the idea at first. There was a big sign that I drove by every day on the way to work that said, become a foster parent. And so after a little bit of maybe badgering, I finally said, okay, let's look into it. So we had the social worker over, and she sat down and talked to us and explained to us what it would look like. And we haven't been very stable in where we've lived for a long time, so I was really struggling with the idea of having somebody come live with us for a year plus time. And the social worker talked to us about becoming a receiving home, and that's where we take emergency placements for short-term while they're looking for long-term foster parents for them, or trying to get a relative placement. And she looked around our house. We had a lot of extra room. Elizabeth was stay-at-home teaching the boys, and we were in town, and it just worked out really well. And that really opened the door for me. I was willing to look at that. It was a 30-day commitment to the kids. So we signed up for that, and in 1 year's time, we had 25 kids come through our house, which was an eye-opener. We learned a lot about what kids work with our family, what kids didn't.
We felt like a lot of the kids that came to us were actually really well behaved. That's one of the things that we get a lot, is people say these kids are probably really difficult or damaged, but we actually felt like the kids were very quiet, very well behaved, mainly, sadly, because nobody ever paid attention to them. They entertained themselves. If they acted out, they were probably abused. And so instead of being wild and crazy, they were actually very quiet. You had to work very hard at getting these kids even to come out of their room or play with us, to want to be involved in our family. They loved the attention. They just didn't know how to react to the attention. We also found that the kids that we thought would be the perfect fit for us, our boys are close in age, at 10 and 11. At the time, we felt like, a boy similar to their age would be perfect, but we actually found that was the worst fit that we had. We kind of had the third wheel thing going on, and it didn't work out very well. Strangely, we thought teenagers would be just, we didn't want to do that. But we have a teenager that has been with us for a year and a half now. we thought maybe little kids, real young, would clash with our boys, but they have been great fits. So the thing that we thought would be perfect was actually the thing I'm really glad that we didn't stick to, because we might have had a lot of disillusionments about foster care had we been tied down to the exact age or gender that we thought at first that we would want.
So we hear a lot of questions about what fostering is like, and we hear a lot of comments, and we just want to address a couple of those. So the first question we often hear is, or the first problem why I wouldn't want to do foster parenting is that I could never give up the kids.
People say it like, I could never give the kids back to their biological family if it goes there. And while I understand maybe the heart between, or where the people are coming from with that, I feel like the greater need here is not you as a parent or a foster parent, but the child. And without you, where are they going to go and what are they going to have? I feel like it's one of those things. A lot of people will get married or have children, and they don't think, well, what if, I get divorced someday? Or what if my child gets some sort of serious illness? Or, what if something bad happens? You don't not get married or not have children simply because of the unknown. And I think the same thing is true for foster care. To say that you're unwilling to have a child into your home because at some point they may leave I think it's selfish, for one. And I think that there's so many other things that we do in life that we take a risk, but why not on this one too?
We also get asked a lot if we're worried that the foster kids will be a negative influence on our kids.
For this one, I actually think that overall the foster kids have just generally not been a negative influence, but greater than that, I think, especially homeschooling my kids, we've been trying to as a parent, you try to protect your kids from a lot of the evil in the world, and you don't want them to know, about rape and abuse, and you don't want them to know about war. But at some point, they're going to find out about that. And I feel like by doing something like having kids into our home that have experienced some of these terrible things, we're able to say, yes, there's evil in the world. These parents do terrible things. Our kids are biological kids often know some of the trauma that the kids have endured when they come to our house. But I can say, look, these parents did terrible things, but now we're here to help. You always look for the helpers, whether it's in a catastrophe, in war, or in anything like that. And here I can say there is terrible things going on in the world, but we're able to to provide some of the light that takes care of some of that evil. And I think as far as our own biological kids have gone, we've been able to help them process that. They cry sometimes when they hear about the evil things that have happened to these kids that are in their homes, or the way that these kids respond, especially to Steve. A lot of the kids that come into our home, they hate men. And it's hard for our kids to understand why they would hate a dad, and it's hard for me to understand this is what their dad did to them. And we try to be truthful in a guarded sort of way, but then they understand, not everybody has a life and a family and a home like we do, but we're trying to make that better, one kid at a time.
We do get a lot of looks and stares as we go into restaurants or into grocery stores. We are a multiracial family. We've had African American kids, we've had Hispanic kids, and kids that definitely don't look anything like us. And at first it was hard, but we got used to it, and it's a little sad in some of the places that we are exposed to that. But in the end, it's the family that we are, and we are okay with it. And
yeah, you grow tough skin, and just hold your head up and don't worry about it. We also get asked a lot about working with a birth family. I think a lot of people are afraid to work with a family that has been known to abuse or neglect their children. And I usually try to respond and say, we get to work with that family. Most of I would say about a third of our kids have had parents who have been in the system themselves, which means they don't know how to parent properly, and they need help, and they don't have often a very good family support. They don't have a church family. They don't have anybody in a lot of cases. And I'm not trying to excuse their behavior, but I am trying to help people understand that, with guidance and with encouragement, a lot of these people would make better choices if they felt like they had that support. we've been foster parents now for 2.5 years, and I still have contact with 3 of the biological parents that we've helped their kids, get back home. And one in particular, the little girl actually still calls and tries to, talk with us. And it was a stable environment for her, and she feels secure being able to talk to us. And I was able to help her mom just come up with some really simple ideas of just being a better parent, things that we would normally, take for granted. But she just never had the exposure and the ability, just a young single mom, and just didn't know what to do. And things got out of control, and she acted in an inappropriate way, but really worked hard to be able to get her kid back. And I support that, isn't that what family is? God created families, whether it's a child to be with our family, or with their own family. And I guess I feel like we have the privilege of working not just with the child, but with the whole family.
Yeah.
Okay. About a year ago, we got a call for 2 little boys that needed placement. The younger one was at Children's Hospital after some severe trauma, and the older boy was placed at a receiving home. And they were looking for a placement for both the boys together, and I knew that there was no place at that time for either one of the boys, and so they had been asking us just to take the child at Children's until they could find a place for the boys together. But I said, yeah, we'll go get the little boy from Children's, and why don't you bring his brother over too, and we'll just keep them both. It was supposed to be a 6-month-ish stay until they could go with some relatives out of state, but that didn't pan out. And over, the course of the first 2 months of having the littlest, although he recovered from a lot of his severe injuries that he had when he first came to us, he ended up needing a trach tube, which is a breathing tube. And at the time, we took him, he actually stopped breathing at our house. We took him to the emergency room at Children's Hospital, where they took him to surgery almost immediately. And they called me from the operating room and said, he's coming out with a trach. You'll have to decide if you want to keep him. And to me, that was just a strange question. I didn't understand at the time enough about the trach to understand why they would even ask that. But I said, well, of course we'll keep him. What else would we do? And the nurse said, well, most kids in this situation would just be hospitalized indefinitely, and until a foster family would become available. But that's unlikely. And so I was like, well, I don't know what it takes, but we'll do it. He's ours. What are we going to do? So over the course of the next couple of days, they started to really paint the picture of what that would look like, and it meant for us that Steve and I would both have to be trained in the little guy's care, and he would not be able to be left unattended. You have to keep your eyes on him, physically watch him constantly while he's awake, and when he was sleeping, he would have to sleep with monitors on. And basically, the concern would be that he would pull out the tube and not be able to breathe because no air would pass over his vocal cords. He couldn't talk or make any noise, and so he would cry, and he would look like he was crying, but you couldn't hear that he was crying, and so again you couldn't hear that he wasn't breathing or in any sort of distress. So he ended up being hospitalized for 3 weeks, and we went down to the hospital nearly every day for those 3 weeks to be able to learn his care and visit with him. At the end of that time, he came home, and we did it. we got up in the middle of the middle of the night with alarms, and he pulled his trach out twice while he was in my care all alone, and I saved him 2 times. And it didn't hit me, I don't think, until after both events were over. I completely lost it and realized just the gravity of the situation and how much responsibility was placed on us. But we did have in-home nursing, which was awesome. I don't know what I would have done without the 2 ladies that would come into our house on a weekly basis and take over his care to help me work with the other kids and just spend time with everybody else because of the demands that were on him. You as a church family were an encouragement during that time. We had a number of people saying that they were, praying for us and asking how things were going. We also had a number of freezer meals that were provided, and that was not only an encouragement and a huge help to us on days that we would unexpectedly go to the hospital, or your 1-hour appointment at Children's would turn into a 4-hour appointment and the day is lost. But also, I'd often have nurses in the house, like I said, and if we had a crazy day, I would just pull out a meal from the freezer and pop it in the oven. And both of the nurses would ask me, like, well, what, you just made stuff ahead? How did you have time for that? And I'd be like, no, that was from our church, And they were both really impressed that the church family would step up and do that for us. And I realized, it's not maybe a huge thing individually, but when we had, 10 or 12 meals in the freezer at any given time, it was extremely helpful. I often didn't even know what it was. I would just pop it in the oven and say, surprise, to the rest of the kids. But that was a huge help. I also wanted to share with you just a little bit about the 3-year-old, the little guy's older brother. He loved Rooted Wednesday night program here at church, and the first couple of weeks were kind of rough. He had never been in a school or church setting really before, and I wasn't sure how that would go, but he absolutely loved it. His favorite song was My God Is So Big, and would just scream that all around the house. And one of the cutest things that he would do is he would pray at meals. Sometimes the kids would take turns, and his prayer constantly would be, Jesus, please come play with me. So he would just ask for Jesus to play with him. And I don't quite know, where he got that or kind of how it means, what it meant, but it was adorable, and he really believed that Jesus would, play with him. So thank you, Miss Cindy, for all of your work with him. He's just a really special kid, and I know you saw that.
It's come to our attention that in Fond du Lac County there's a church that's known as the Foster Care Church. There's the social workers call it that. They say whenever there's a shortage of foster families, they know they can go to this church and find more foster families. Foster families, unfortunately, are often short-term in that many foster kids get adopted. Only about 30% of kids end up going back to their biological parents. So it was a real eye-opener for us to see that and hear about that. And we'd just like to put out the challenge that why shouldn't all churches be called the foster family churches? Why can't Plymouth Alliance be the church where social services know they can come to find more foster families?
How old are your, or what do you have?
The little boys, we have our oldest foster daughter she just turned 14, and then we've got our boys, Simon and Jude, they're 10 and 11.
Your boys?
Yep.
Yeah, our biologicals.
And then our
in the foster care terms, we call them bios and fosters.
Yeah.
So our bios.
Yeah, our bios. And then the 2 little boys that I was talking about, they just went with a pre-adoptive family a week ago Friday. Okay. So it's been just a few days.
So your bios are, you said 11 and 14? Is it?
No, 10 and 11.
10 and 11.
Yeah.
How, was there some getting used to things for them for, like how your time was given to the foster children versus them, and was there some questioning on their part, we try to do everything like we're supposed to, and
yeah.
They may not, and all your time is kind of given to them, and where do we stand here?
With the last 2 kids,
let me answer that.
Is it for the video?
Well, it kind of.
It's just still, but this won't necessarily be in there. But
it has been a struggle for our kids to share time with other kids, especially with the high medical needs of the last 2 brothers that we had. The commitment of spending time sitting in waiting rooms of hospitals, and when we can't let the one boy out of our sight, all of our time is devoted to him, and they have had to learn to cope without us, and it's been hard for them, but it's really been good for them. They've really grown up a lot, and they've really learned that the world does not revolve around them. So in many ways, we've seen a lot of positive outcomes in our boys' lives.
And they've been so helpful, too. Especially our oldest and our boys, being willing to step up and help make a sandwich or, whatever needs to be done for one of the little guys. So it's been a good growing experience for them, too.
What about kind of how God, Steve, you weren't as willing in the beginning. Can you just talk about your journey of being willing and how God has really shown you, the depth of what you've done in foster?
Yeah.
Parenting?
Now looking back on the last 2 years or so, it's really been giving me a new worldview. I mean, I come from a missionary family. I've been exposed to poverty and a lot of the world, and like I said earlier, it was really a comfort level. I was happy with where I was at, and wasn't sure I wanted to really mix up my life a whole lot. But looking back on it, I wouldn't trade it. To see these kids that haven't had a dad figure, and to see when I come home every day from work and they share a meal with us, and some of these kids, after literally days with us, started calling me dad. It just breaks your heart. And we had one little girl that would get afraid every time she heard I was coming home, because she's like, I gotta clean up my toys, Dad's coming home. Or Steve, I guess she called me, is coming home. And to explain to her over the course of the couple weeks that we had her, that I'm not going to hurt her, and she can leave her toys out, and just to see how she changed. And we actually had her come back to us 6 months afterwards, and she was a changed girl. She was excited to see me. She had confidence like you couldn't believe. She was 4 and about 70 pounds when she came to our house, and she spent 6 months with a new foster family, and she was down probably a good 40 pounds, almost the size that she was probably at about 40 pounds, I guess, when she came back, at the size that she should be for a 4-year-old, and she could jump and run, and she was so excited to see us again, and to see Steve, and she would hug him, which 6 months ago she would not have done that. So all kinds of positive changes. For me, it was definitely something that I'm glad that we stepped into, and as hard as it was at sometimes, it's always been rewarding and positive. And I think if it weren't for the receiving home aspect of being able to take that small step, I feel like God really opened the door for Steve to say it wasn't just jump into a kid for the next 3 years, some unknown child, unknown everything. It was here's a little glance of what it could be. And if, like for Steve, it was this out, if it doesn't go well, if this child is, just a little devil, we can do it for 30 days and then they'll move on. And it wasn't that way at all, but I think just to ease his mind and say, take the small step of faith, open this door and see what it's like. It opened us up to things like, if you had told me a couple of years ago that I'd have a 2-year-old with a trach, there's absolutely no way I would have believed you. It just didn't seem possible, but it was just one small step at a time. Again, having a 14-year-old, another thing that we just didn't think would even, be on our plates. I thought, a 5-year-old boy, we could do that, and it's so way out of whatever we thought we would do. But just one little step at a time, we were able to say, yeah, okay, we can try that. Wow, that wasn't so bad. And, what about this? And I think we're right where, God wanted us to be 2.5 years down the road,
How do you work through the transitions between taking them in as your own and then, transitioning to letting them go again, that's got to be just
it's extremely
an emotional roller coaster. Yeah.
We've only had these 2 boys recently, are our only 2 long-term placements that have moved on. And as the receiving home, we were very much of the mindset that this is short-term. We're moving them to a better place. We're transitioning them to a better home. There was no thought that it would be adoption or long-term, because it was the longest we ever had anybody in receiving home was 6 weeks. And so you just went into it, okay, what do I need to do now to get things moving, to get them safe and secure, to be able to move on? And if they were old enough, the first thing that you say when they come into your house is, we're just here to help for a little while, until we can figure out what's going to be best. And so then I would sit down with the kids at the end of their stay and say things like, remember when you first came and we talked that it was just going to be for a little while? Well, the thing that we figured out was best was for you to go to a long-term home, or you're going to get to go with grandma and grandpa. something like that was always easier, because usually the kids are like, yes, grandma, like that was usually an easy thing. With these boys, I've been taking this very, very hard. But I still know that, in the end, it's a good decision, I feel a lot like I'm abandoning them. And this morning in church was really hard for me, just like a really peppy song. I'm like, Mark, we should be sitting there with Steve clapping along, because that's what he does every Sunday, And I just sort of lost it. But
but they're all right, like I know they're okay and I know they're doing well.
And they went to a Lutheran family in Fond du Lac, and
they're really active in their church.
Active in the church. They're going to, the 3-year-old's going to continue in Sunday school, and
they'll go to a Christian, the Lutheran school and things. And so it's been good. And we're going to continue to work with that family too. They don't have kids. So, she'll email me and text me like, oh, what do you do about this? And how is this and stuff. So even though it's not a biological family, we're having an opportunity to talk with them and work with them and encourage them. And, really the age gap between our biological and oldest foster and the little boys was one of the big determining factors of whether or not we could keep them long term, and they both have very high needs. And so to be able to provide enough care for all 5 wasn't going to happen. And so we kind of had to make the decision, is this going to, work for us long term? And I think the answer was pretty clear that it wasn't going to.
And we really talked a lot that we got into foster care to do foster care. We didn't get into it. A lot of families get into it to grow their family. Like, if you can't have your own kids, it's a good way to grow your family. But we really got into it because we wanted to do foster care.
Like I said at the beginning, we were never like huge, let's have 10 kids. It was like 1, maybe 2, and that's where we're at. We're like done, So, we're open to the idea of adoption, with the right fit and that kind of thing. I don't think it's like a complete no, but it's certainly not what we were really hoping for at the beginning. So.
There, go ahead.
With the receiving home, we never really had a choice with if we were going to take a kid or not. We were actually on payroll with Fond du Lac County, and part of our job description was we need to take all kids, any kids at any time.
We actually got vacation days.
So, so that was definitely a kind of take it as you go and see what happens kind of scenario. When we decided to be done with foster receiving home, we had our 13-year-old living with us at the time, and that there was very much a prayerful decision where we had to decide, we're moving from Fond du Lac to Plymouth. She'd have to switch schools. Do you want to come with us? Do we want her to come with us? And so we discussed it for a long time and discussed it with her and made the decision to bring her with us. And that was very much a lengthy situation where we discussed it. Moving forward, we were kind of put back into receiving home situation because they were so low on families. We were trying to remodel our house, and they kept calling us and saying, "Hey, we've got this placement. It's going to be
3 days."
3 days, and it would turn into 3 weeks. And so we often didn't have the time to really consider it.
Well, and in situations like that, they would often call me while Steve was at work, and they'd explain, this is what we have. What do you think? I'm like, oh, yes, all right. And I just did. I was like, all right. And it would be, I might get 2 hours notice. And so we'd be at the city pool last summer, and I'd drop everything, run to Walmart, grab diapers or whatever we needed. And then the kid would show up at our doorstep. And I would text Steve somewhere in there and say, there's a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at our house tonight. And he'd be like, what? I'm like, surprise, and I'm like, don't worry, it's only going to be a couple of days. And then it ended up to be, 3 weeks, 4 weeks or whatever. But he's great with just kind of rolling with it, and I'm not a flexible person, I wouldn't say, but with this, I've been extremely flexible, and I just let the kid join in with our family. Whatever we're doing, they're going to come do. And I don't make special arrangements, really. We just kind of try to act as normal as we can, and from day one, we're consistent and steady with all of our decisions, concerning the kid. And
they really became part of our family, even if it was only for 3 days. It was, they teach you in foster care training that you can't treat these kids as guests, right, because they will overtake you.
or they don't know how to respond.
Yeah.
They need the consistent.
So we did chores, you help them with meals, whatever they can do. We made sure that they were part of our family from the very beginning and treated them just like that. We never treated them any different than our own kids. And
And as we're going forward now, since our little boys have been placed in a pre-adoptive home, we're talking about taking a couple of months and just kind of getting back to, who are we and what are we looking for. It's been a very stressful time. Our kids, the 3 big ones, have been great and understanding, but they need some attention too. And we need to just kind of figure out, are we going to have more kids? If we're going to, what does that look like? What's the right fit, gender dynamic, all of that stuff. And we're way more open now than we ever would have been before. But we're still trying to just take that time and just prayerfully consider what's going to be the right need. But in the meantime, I've also emailed our licensing worker and just said, what's the need? What's out there? What don't you have a home for? Is it teenagers right now, or is it little ones, or is it just everybody? And then I usually just kind of say, if something comes up and you think it's going to be a good fit, let us know, because we might be open to it, even if it's not what we thought would be the right fit for our family.
The troubled kids are the hardest to place, the older kids and the troubled kids, and we've found that
I love the troubled kids.
we found that we never would have thought that before. We thought we wanted a straight-laced kid, somebody that won't influence our kids poorly, but we found that we're really doing well with kids that have high needs.
Yeah, those strong-willed ones, they bite you and pull your hair. And then they break down and say, I'm so sorry. And it's, you know that there's good in there, and you just need to find it and help bring it out. Yeah.
That's good that you guys are taking some months to just be as a family.
He really wants 6 months, and I'm like, what do you think? And but we've got this room open, and I know there's kids out there, and it just kills me, I'm just like, maybe not forever, but I don't know. And I know that they stress out good families. Like we had a baby for a while, and he went to a home that they had 4 biological kids and 4 that they just got done adopting. And they had like 4 big ones in high school and then 4 little ones all like under first grade.
Wow.
And then they got placed with this baby. And I'm like, they weren't looking for another kid, and a little white baby boy should be the easiest thing to place. And they just didn't have anybody for him. And I know that exists, and that's what bugs me. I'm like, even if for a little while, so I keep saying, I'm like, if they call, you might get a text, like even for a short term, because like we have an open bed, and it just, it's hard for me to know that these kids are out there.
So maybe I missed this in the beginning. How long have you been actively participating in this?
We've been licensed, last February was 2 years, so coming up on 2.5, yeah.
I always question, I was raised a missionary kid, and I feel like I need to be doing something. And we've been very fortunate financially, and we're able to support several missionary families. And my parents were missionaries after I graduated, and we were able to support my parents for a number of years. And people always ask me, are you going to go back into missions? And I love missions. I've wanted her to get on a short-term missions trip for a number of years now, and just hasn't worked for our family. But I feel like we can have a mission. We're at home and we're serving the Great Commission, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
So if any of you are interested in becoming a foster family or talking with someone, you can certainly talk with Steve or myself. We'd be happy to have you over, or talk with you after church one day. The need is huge. The reward is great. It is a challenge. It is stressful. We're not trying to sugarcoat everything. We've had rough days. We've had rough years, but it's worth it in the end. And we firmly believe that God is calling more people, more Christian families, to be foster parents to these kids, whether just in a short-term capacity for like weekend respite, or in a receiving home or a regular foster home, even relative care. There's all kinds of ways that you could step up and help. At the very least, please, if you know any foster families, support them, pray for them, have them over. Big families, mixed families. We don't get invited very often, to be honest. I think people, they love the idea, but they're a little afraid of what they might get, a family of 5 kids coming over, and, you're just not sure. Take a chance, take a risk. The kids are worth it. The family's really neat if we get to know them. Thank you.